Weekly. I'm your host, Monica Palayo. This is where we examine the subconscious pattern, shaping your decisions so you could change them. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, thank you for being back. Today's episode is titled How Your Beliefs Distort Reality Without Realizing It. Let's begin. When your mind feels real, but it isn't always truth, what you feel is real, that doesn't mean it's true. There were many mornings on my way to work back when I used to take the max early in my time at Intel, where my mind would already be somewhere else, creating scenarios that felt completely real at the time. I was still trying to find a place in a new environment where I didn't fully feel like I belonged. And even though nothing had actually happened in that moment, my body was already reacting as it had. At the time, I didn't understand what was really happening. All I knew was that the emotions felt real. The tension, the fear, the sense that something was wrong. But what I understand now is that those emotions didn't come from what was actually happening. They came from the thoughts my mind was creating about what could happen. We don't experience life exactly as it is. We experience life based on how we interpret it, and those interpretations are shaped by our belief systems. That is why two people can go through the same situation and walk away with completely different experiences. Not because the situation was different, but because the meaning they gave it was. You're not reacting to reality, you're reacting to what your mind made it mean. That's where distortion begins. A thought creates an emotion when your mind starts going into scenarios about things going wrong, about not being enough, or about losing something. Your body responds to those thoughts with very real emotions. The feeling is real, but it is being triggered by a thought, not necessarily by reality. I've experienced this myself in simple moments. You could be on a ladder, steady and fine, but the moment your mind starts visualizing you slipping or falling, your focus shifts. You start looking down, your body tightens, and your movement changes. Nothing actually happened, but your mind already created the experience. At the time, I was in a relationship that, if I'm honest, was never truly healthy. My mind would wander, and I would start creating scenarios in my head of him cheating on me, of him becoming physically abusive again, of the relationship falling apart, and me having to walk away, becoming a single mother, trying to figure out where we would live, how I would provide, and how I would survive with very limited resources while taking care of my daughter. Even though nothing had actually happened in that moment, my body was already reacting as if it had. There was a constant tension, like I needed to prepare myself for what could go wrong. For a long time, I thought maybe I was just a negative thinker. I struggled with depression, so part of me believed that the overthinking was part of that. That maybe this was just how my mind worked. At the time, it was familiar to my brain and happening automatically. I wasn't consciously questioning it, and I wasn't aware that it was a pattern or how much it was actually affecting me. Back then, those thoughts were running in the background, but I didn't realize how much they were shaping how I felt, how I reacted, or the outcomes I was creating. It wasn't until later, through my training and becoming a hypnotherapist, that I began to see it clearly. There was a pattern, and the thoughts always moved in the same direction. At the same time, I saw this show up in my work as well. Early in my career at Intel, when I was supporting the chief of staff to an ELT, that feeling started. In this type of role, you are the support, but you are not always included in everything. There's a level of separation built into the structure. And at that time, I didn't understand that. I interpreted that distance as something personal. In other roles where I was the main executive assistant, I had a seat at the table. I worked closely with an executive who was very inclusive, who empowered me, trusted me to make decisions, and included me in everything. I felt confident in my role, and clear in how I contributed. When he left until right as COVID started, that was a significant loss for me, both professionally and personally. At that time, I needed to find another role within Intel, and there were only two options available at my grade level. One was to support a new IT executive, and the other was to become the assistant to the chief of staff to the CEO. That was a role I had previously said I would never take because of the earlier experience, where I often felt excluded and removed from what was happening. But given the limited options at the time, I accepted the role. When I moved into the CEO office, supporting the chief of staff to the CEO, that shift was immediately. It was the complete opposite of what I had experienced before. The challenge wasn't with my boss, it was the structure of the role and how the office was operating at that time. At the same time, I had been told during the hiring process that I wasn't the first choice for the role. That stayed in the back of my mind. So from the beginning, I was already looking at everything through that lens. Everything was also fully remote because of COVID, which added another layer to the experience. I didn't have the opportunity to build relationships in person or even meet the boss until 6 months into the role. Emotionally, it was a difficult period. I went from feeling confident and secure in my role to questioning where I fit. There were moments where I felt overwhelmed, even calling my boyfriend at the time in tears because I felt like I didn't belong. Because of that, I started interpreting everything through that lens. If I wasn't included, I assumed I was being excluded. If I didn't have information, I thought I was being left out. If communication was clear, I took it personally. Looking back now, I can see it differently. When leadership changed, the culture shifted and became much more inclusive. At the same time, I can also see how my interpretation was influenced by the belief that I didn't belong. There were people who supported me and trusted me, but I wasn't fully seeing that because I was filtering everything through the belief. Over time, it became one of my favorite groups to work with. The camaraderie, the synchronicity, the way we worked together, it felt like a family. I wasn't reacting to what was actually happening, I was reacting to what I thought it meant. This past week made this even clearer. Helping my godson through legal matters, I was able to witness this in real time. Being around him, I started paying close attention to his behavior, his reactions, and how quickly his perception of situations would shift. What stood out to me the most was how much fear of potential legal consequences was driving his thinking. That fear began shaping how he interpreted everything and influencing how he responded and behaved. The more he believed something was going to happen, the more his actions started aligning with that belief, almost creating the very outcome he was trying to avoid. The belief was not just affecting how he felt, it was driving how he acted, and those actions were influencing what happened next. The more he responded from that fear, the more it reinforced the belief. Over time, it becomes a self fulfilling pattern. And something I learned in my training because it became a very clear in that moment. When someone is emotionally activated, logic doesn't land the same way. No matter how much reassurance I gave them or how much I tried to explain what was actually happening, it wasn't registering. His mind was focused on the emotion, the fear, and the stories he was creating in his head, and that was driving his behavior and the outcome. When someone is emotionally activated, their interpretation is no longer coming from what is actually happening in the moment. It is coming from the emotion they are feeling, often tied to past experiences that felt similar. The stronger the emotion, the more convincing that interpretation feels. I began noticing the change in his voice, going from calm to emotional, from emotional to crying to feeling lost. His behavior was constantly shifting based on what he was thinking and feeling in that moment. And that's what made it so clear to me. It wasn't about what was happening externally, it was about what was happening internally. That's why in my work, I pay close attention to the body. The body gives clues. When someone's tone shifts, their expression changes, or their body reacts, that moment tells me something important. It shows me where the emotional weight is and where I need to go deeper to understand what is actually driving the response. Because it's not the event that creates the emotional response, it's the interpretation of that event. Your mind tells your body what to do, your body responds, and it's your job to tell your mind what to do. Many people believe their thoughts control them, but they have simply not learned how to interrupt them yet. If you're watching TV and you don't like what you see, you change the channel. If you're on social media and something does not feel right, you scroll or exit. You don't stay. Same applies to your thoughts. You don't have to stay there. You can stop it, shift it, and redirect your focus. The shift didn't happen because the thoughts stopped. The shift happened because I stopped feeding them. I remember being in the middle of my certification, still working in the CEO office, and applying everything I was learning in real time. The thoughts would come up like they always had, but instead of following them, I interrupted them. I would literally tell myself, I'm not feeding this thought. I realized I was creating scenarios that weren't real. The thought wasn't the truth, it was a pattern of reflection of a belief I had carried for years, rooted in a misunderstanding that was no longer true but still running automatically in the background. In that moment, I had a choice. I could keep reacting from that pattern, or I could step back and look at it and analyze what was actually happening. I began analyzing what I was feeling to understand what belief was driving it. Once I could see it, I was able to question it and recognize that what I was thinking wasn't necessarily true. That awareness changed everything. Instead of letting the thoughts run automatically, I started catching them in real time and choosing not to engage with them. Over time, something even more important shifted. I stopped creating those kinds of scenarios altogether. And if I do create a scenario, it's intentional, based on the outcome I want. I understood that a thought creates an emotion, that emotion influences how you act, and those actions shape your results. So instead of allowing my mind to create outcomes I didn't want, I started choosing thoughts that aligned with the life and results I do want. Because when you change what you believe, you change what you see, how you respond, and ultimately what you create. Use these questions to create awareness. Where in your life are you reacting to a story instead of facts? What belief could be shaping that story? How's that belief influencing your behavior, your relationships, and your results? Because if you don't interrupt the pattern, you will continue to repeat it. So the real question is, how long are you going to keep responding to something that isn't even true? Do you want to keep living the same pattern? Or are you ready to break it? That is exactly the work I do. Through hypnosis and subconscious work, we identify the belief at the root, interrupt the pattern, and change it so it's no longer controlling how you think, feel, and respond. If you're ready to break the pattern, schedule your exploratory call. If something in this episode brought awareness to a pattern you hadn't fully seen before, take a moment to reflect on it. Awareness is where meaningful change begins. The more we understand the subconscious belief shaping our reaction, the more power we have to respond differently and create new outcomes. Thank you for spending this time with me and for being part of these conversations about awareness, growth, and transformation. If this episode helped you see something more clearly, share it with someone who may benefit from hearing it. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss next week's Breakthrough Weekly. I'm Monica Pelayo, and I'll see you next time.